Welcome to From the Trenches, success shortcuts revealed by real-world innovators crushing it right now. I'm your host, Scott Hartley, and we're back with another episode packed with actionable strategies from today's most successful entrepreneurs. If you're tired of generic business advice and ready for real cutting-edge tactics that are working right now, you're in the right place. In a world of endless cold DMs and forgotten business cards, most small business owners are just one powerful connection away from their next big breakthrough. Yet 86% will never make it. I personally have watched a bunch of brilliant entrepreneurs with life-changing ideas fade into obscurity simply because they couldn't get in front of the right person. Your competitors aren't winning because they're better than you. They're winning because they know exactly how to open doors that you don't even know exist. Well, today that's going to change. My guest reveals a shockingly simple 5-minute technique that's helped ordinary entrepreneurs land meetings with impossible to reach decision makers, secure funding without begging, and create partnership opportunities that transform businesses overnight, all using just one powerful question that nobody asks. So let me introduce you to Steven Rowell. He works with successful business consultants and speakers who want to impact more lives with more time freedom by earning more from every speaking engagement using his signature strategic revenue method. Steven helps clients land more corporate engagements, land licensing and corporate sponsorship deals, as well as create revenue methods such as champions networks, masterminds, and 5-figure events. He's provided consulting and training to 24 Fortune 500 companies such as UPS, Walmart, Compass, Shell, Pfizer, and Huntsman. He's also licensed his patient satisfaction system to 1,100 hospitals nationwide. He credits much of his success to the 7 years he spent opening new resorts for Walt Disney World. He's the author of multiple books, including Success from the Inside Out, Jumpstart Your Creativity, and the one we're going to talk about today is How to Connect with Anyone, Anywhere, at Any Time, with 214,000 books distributed globally. And he's also performed improv with the famous Wayne Brady in Las Vegas, and he occasionally sounds just like Mickey Mouse, Goofy, and Eeyore, and that probably would have been more interesting as I was going through all of our intro had him do it today. So, Steven, I'm excited to have you on the podcast.
Everybody, oh, wow, it's Mickey Mouse.
Hey, we have a very famous person on
Yeah,
today, Mickey Mouse, straight from Walt Disney World. So awesome.
great to be here. Thanks, Scott.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, you've got quite a varied background, and it's interesting to to know that you've got a background with Walt Disney. I know several people, Vance Morris and others that have kind of come from that world and are really making a lot of life-changing shifts for business owners who don't have that opportunity, who don't have that experience. So before we kind of dive into the topic today of how to make these connections, just give us a short overview of your background. How did you get, working at Walt Disney World, and what did you
Sure.
take away from that?
Sure. So I started out in college as a college intern on the Disney College program, and I worked at the front desk of the Grand Floridian Beach Resort, which is the big luxury resort in Orlando at Walt
Mhm.
Disney World, and had an absolute blast being the ambassador to guests as they came to share their vacations at Walt Disney World. And it was an absolutely transformational experience. And I also had other opportunities to open other resorts while I was there,
Hmm.
and ended up graduating from college and had received an award from the Disney College program. So I was able to go back a second time as an intern, a second time while I was still in college, and went back to the Grand Floridian, worked in all the different departments of the resort hotel, including housekeeping. Believe it or not, I cleaned 18 rooms a day as a housekeeper,
Oh,
which
wow.
which was crazy. Back then we changed out the sheets on every single bed, whether the guests had used the bed or not. So it
Hmm.
was quite the workout. And I ended up losing about 30 pounds that one summer working in housekeeping. So that was a great experience as well. But
Hmm.
basically fell in love with the Disney model. And then I had the opportunity to work at Disney University.
Okay.
And so what happened was when I graduated college, I went directly back to Disney and worked for Walt Disney World and was at the Grand Floridian Beach Resort for a while. And then I ended up opening multiple resorts that were new construction. So new resorts that were being opened at the time. And then I also fell in love with working at Disney University, and that's where I fell in love with training and
Hmm.
development. And I taught new hire orientation. So
Okay.
basically, I got to see things from the operations side, from the whole how to make magic side of service excellence, and then also from the training and development side, and fell in love with all aspects of the company. And so then I ended up getting recruited away from Disney. I thought I was going to work at Disney the rest of my life,
Hmm.
but I ended up getting recruited away from Disney, and that's what took me to the Northeast, where I ended up working as the national director of training and development for a big company that we ended up ultimately selling. Several years later, we sold to Compass Group.
Okay.
Yep.
Very fascinating. I'm sure that you probably have a lot of stories that you could tell us about your time at Disney. Just a little aside here. So, kind of tell us a little bit about how you managed to do improv with Wayne Brady in Las Vegas, because I mean that will tie into what we're talking about. I'm sure about making connections.
Oh, sure. So it turned out that a friend of mine, Paul Heiser, is the lookalike for Chris Farley.
Okay.
And he was in Vegas, working in Vegas full time as the Chris Farley lookalike. And he and I have become friends. And so we went to a Wayne Brady show one night, and he said, "Hey, do you want to get up on stage?" And I said, "Sure, that'd be great. Are you kidding me? That'd be a blast." So whatever it is that he wrote on this card, I don't know what it is to this day. I don't know what it is that Paul wrote on this card, but
Hmm.
whatever it was that he wrote on the card, when it went to the handlers, because they have at improv shows, people fill out different funny comments, and they
Hmm.
fill out these cards and they turn in the cards, and then the team there sifts and sorts through the cards to find the ones that they're going to pull from the audience.
Yep.
So I don't know what Paul said, I don't know what he wrote, but whatever it was, it worked, and it got me up on stage with Wayne and Jonathan. And back then I was a lot heavier. In fact, I was probably 60 pounds heavier. And
Hmm.
so with longer hair and more weight, I looked a lot like Newman from Seinfeld,
Okay.
and it didn't take them long to pick up on that. So I ended up being this Newman-like character throughout the entire show. But then what was fun was we did that night, and then they invited us to come back the next night. And so we actually came back the second night, and I got to do it a second night, and we did something completely different, but it was fun. It was
Oh,
really
wow.
it was a life-changing experience for sure. It was fun.
Absolutely. And to be on stage in Las Vegas, I mean, you got some claim to
Yep.
fame there now. So
That was fun.
that's awesome. Well, I really want to dive into, today, as I kind of mentioned in the intro, is that really life is all about who you know. And making those connections, because that can be some really big breakthroughs for business owners. But a lot of us, I'm sure there's a lot of people like myself who are introverts, and so we have a hard time making the ask. We're kind of afraid of putting ourselves out there, those types of things. So I'd love to kind of like hear your take on this, and as a kind of tease, the 5 minute technique that's helping people to land meetings with these decision makers that are like, "Oh, I don't know that I could ever have an audience with them." So start to share with us some of your wisdom here.
Sure. So it all started with curiosity, and it's really this positioning yourself from a place of being genuinely curious about the other person. And it started when I was 19 years old, and back in the 80s, before the internet. And I picked up the phone, and back then you used to be able to call 1-800-555-1212 and get connected to any company in America,
Hmm.
basically. And so, using that old system with a phone that was still attached to the wall in my college dorm room,
Uh-huh.
I picked up the phone and I called Walmart and asked for Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart. And with this one question, I was able to get through the gatekeeper. And when I asked the question, she was rather patronizing and, "Oh, isn't that sweet?" And just one moment. And she's obviously paid to be the gatekeeper to manage his time.
Uh-huh.
And so sure enough, she comes back on the phone and she says, "Well, he'll take your call." And you could hear in her voice that she couldn't believe it, but that he would take the call. So then I asked my one question, and he ended up talking to me for almost 2 hours. And
Wow.
I was blown away. And I was sitting there with a college ruled notebook, spiral notebook, piece of paper and a pen, and writing as fast as I possibly could, getting writer's cramp, writing down all these gems of what he was sharing with me. And it was absolutely life changing. Couldn't believe it happened. And then the second person that I called that same day from my dorm room was Federal Express. And so I called Fred Smith of FedEx, and the founder of FedEx, and asked him the same question. And he talked to me for an hour and a half. And each time, both of these men, they would get interrupted during our calls, And they would say, for instance, so and so meeting is going on. You need to go to this meeting, and they'd go, "Oh, don't worry about it. So and so can handle that meeting. I don't need to be at that."
Wow.
And so I realized I had just organically tapped into something with this question that made people that were super successful want to stop and talk about what they had achieved and what they had done.
Hmm.
And so the question that changed my life then, beyond the first question, is the last question, which is at the end of the Fred Smith conversation, I asked him, "Is there anyone else that you think would be willing to speak to me like you have?"
Hmm.
And then he says, "Well, sure. You're in Fort Worth, Texas, right?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "Well, tell you what, if you're in Fort Worth, tell you what, ask my old Yale fraternity brother how it is that he got 10 men to put up all the money to buy the Texas Rangers, but he kept 17% ownership. Ask him how he did that." Like, wait a second. Are you talking about the Bush family? And sure enough, he was talking about George W. Bush. And back then, he was just the billionaire son, right, of a president of the United States, um, and or soon to be president of the United States. And so, what was amazing was when I called George Bush, he answers the phone. Any friend of Fred's is a friend of mine. And so now all of a sudden, I realized there was this halo effect that
Hmm.
was going on by being referred by one person to another. And so what I learned over the time, because what I did over my college years is I ended up doing hundreds of these phone calls.
Hmm.
And I did them over and over and over and over. And I did it just to simply explore different careers, different people, just was fascinated by what made people successful. And so I just continued to do these calls, did hundreds of these calls. And what I found was, as important as the first question is, the last question is the one that's transformative, because when you call someone else and they say, "Oh, any friend of Scott's, right, is a friend of mine. I'll be happy to talk to you." And so you, Scott, for instance, referred me to somebody else.
Hmm.
Halo effect is there. And so what I learned was people have this thought, which is, well, Scott's not going to waste my time and send me somebody to talk to that's, not a worthwhile person or
Yeah.
time. And so there's a halo effect that happens. And so what I learned was over the years was that 5 times in my career, I have had angel investors invest in my companies. And all 5 of these angel investors came from these second level phone calls. So it was
Wow.
the so and so referred me to you, and that second round person I spoke to ended up becoming an angel investor. And so I was absolutely floored by it. Obviously, the very first time it happened, I couldn't believe it happened.
Hmm.
And the person says, "Well, tell you what, I'll send you $100,000, and all I ask is that you let me be your mentor every month, and once a month we talk, and I help you grow your business." And I said, "Well, I don't need 100,000. I just need 50,000." And he says, "Okay, I'll wire you 50,000, and then what I'll do is I'll wire you, or I'll send you a letter of credit for another 50. If you don't use it, that's fine." And so what I learned from that experience was about 4 months in, I was late in making my monthly call, and I got a call from the executive assistant from this gentleman, and she says, "Stephen, remember the promise you made was that you would call him every month and allow him to be your mentor and advise you on growing your business. And so don't blow it." And so sure enough, I called, I apologized for being late. We worked through that, and then I kept those calls going every month from that point on. And what I learned from that was these angel investor types were people who had already achieved financial freedom, they'd already achieved time freedom, they'd already achieved career success. And
Hmm.
what they were doing is they were giving back, and they were in that state in their life where they were wanting to give back to the next generation and were wanting to help people with growing their ventures. And
Hmm.
so it's also the excitement of the game. So I learned quite a bit about the power of these questions. It was really transformational.
Wow, those are some like really interesting stories, and just to think like you can break through those gatekeepers because I had an IT business before I started the business now where I'm helping people get their emails delivered, and unfortunately, there's challenges in the world of IT, and sometimes I needed to escalate things up, the corporate chain, and sometimes I needed to go all the way up to the top, but I never actually got to speak with Michael Dell at Dell Computers
Right.
or anything like that. But
Right.
to hear you be able to just to break through and get right through to Sam Walton and George Bush and different things like that's phenomenal.
Yep. Absolutely. And it works also with, everyday people as well. it's just an amazing way to genuinely connect with someone
Hmm.
in a deep way, and it's because of the nature of the question,
Yeah.
and it's because of the kind of the secret DNA, if you will, of the question. So probably it would be helpful if I shared what the question is.
Well, before you share the question, because I'm like really curious about these questions, and I was actually just kind of in the back of my mind wondering, is like, okay, is Steven going to share that with us, or are we going to need to go get his book? Like, I've got Amazon pulled up here, but and I am going to get your book. But before you give us the question, you were in college when you came up with these, and you were making, the phone calls, from your dorm room. And of course, now I'm sure you probably wish that you had a way to record all of those phone calls, because back then it wasn't quite as easy as it is today.
Right.
But what amount of time, if any, did you spend in thinking about these questions before you started to make these phone calls?
Well, it was interesting. I was inspired by a class that I would taken in college where we watched this film called In Search of Excellence.
Mm-hmm.
And it was by Tom Peters and Robert Waterman, and they had done this study. They were McKinsey consultants, and they had done this study of 7 different companies and looking at best practices within the companies. And back then, at the time in the 80s, best practices wasn't a thing like it is today. Today, best practices is a given, but back then it was new, it was novel. And so what happened was the inspiration for these questions was watching that video and seeing that Tom Peters basically was asking these CEOs and asking the executives inside the companies what made them special and what was it that made them unique.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that, I was inspired to ask, and that in fact is why I called FedEx, was because Federal Express was on that video. They were one
Okay.
of the companies that McKinsey had studied as,
Mm-hmm.
part of being a special company or a high performing company. And so at first it was just those 2 questions that I really thought about, but then over time I got really good at asking additional questions and in the middle of the conversation that
Mm-hmm.
were, really keep the conversation going and so on. But in the beginning it was just thinking about the opening question and then the follow, being sure to ask the follow-up question at the end, which is, you've been so generous with your time talking to me today. I'm just curious, is there someone else that you think would be willing to talk to me like you have?
Mm-hmm.
And so now that's your closing question. And that's when they refer you to George Bush, they refer you to someone else. And that's where you make that halo effect phone call.
Yeah. So yeah, that's interesting, kind of getting that inspiration from, what you were learning in classes there at college. Before we dive into the opening question, because I know we want to get that, but I don't want to forget this. So when you ask that closing question, hey, you've been so generous. Just curious, is there anybody else that you think would be able to spend some time with me? After they say yes, because most likely they're going to,
Right.
do they then offer to make the introduction to where you can do that, or how did that kind of work for you?
Sure. 9 times out of 10, and I still do these phone calls today, just so you know, I'm 58 years old today and I still do these phone calls.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in fact, anytime I'm down or out or find myself focusing too much on myself or
Yeah.
what I might be going through in my life, I always focus outward. And so I'll make these kind of phone calls to extend myself out into the universe, uh,
Mm-hmm.
to really get outside of myself. Um, but basically, um, the opportunity is they will offer probably 9 times out of 10, they'll offer to connect you to the person.
Okay.
Today, what happens is they'll say, well, I'll have my assistant contact you.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's typically online calendar links and things like that. So one of the things that I did early on was I got an online calendar link to make it easy for these people to simply go onto my calendar and book a call with me.
Mm-hmm.
Back when Calendly first started it out and those kinds of online calendars.
Yeah.
Uh, but basically, they coordinate it for you. They say, "Well, look, I'll have my assistant connect you,"
Mm-hmm.
and then it goes forward from there.
Okay. Very good. Now, yes, I'm teasing because I'm trying to keep people here to the very end. So I don't want you to give away the goods just yet. So before we dive into like that opening question and maybe some of the follow-up questions that you ask, um, what and I just lost the question that I was going to ask. What are some of the benefits that practically? I mean, you mentioned that when you were going through this process that you were able to land angel investors for your business. But if we're talking to solopreneurs, if we're talking to small business owners, what are some of the benefits that they're going to be able to see by using some of these questions and opening doors that they didn't even know were possible for them.
Sure. So one example is by asking the question, you'll end up talking very few minutes during the conversation, and you'll actually spend most of your time listening. And it's because of the nature of the question and the way it opens the person up, and then they'll just start talking. The
Hmm.
second piece is because of the nature of the question and because people don't normally get a chance to talk about themselves, you end up with a level of intimacy that occurs that they don't even understand. They will not even understand why they felt so close to you or why they felt that the conversation went so well. But there's a whole psychology to it, which I'll explain in a minute. But the concept is you'll end up being able to go deeper with somebody faster
Hmm.
than they're used to. And I was just at an Irish business um, chamber of commerce meeting, for instance, just the other day with a friend of mine.
Hmm.
We played around the golf, and then we went to this networking event afterwards. And just as a fun way for me to do this, I would wait for the right moment within this networking situation. And when there would be like just two or three of us standing there, I would use my question and I would ask the question to the person. And then it took all the pressure off of me and the other person to have to
Hmm.
worry about what's going to be said next and all of that. And the person just starts to open up and blossoms like a flower. And the next thing you know, they're telling you stories about their business and about their life. And the key thing, one of the big benefits is I've learned more about more industries and have such an eclectic background now of knowledge of different industries and different business practices, different best practices, different
Hmm.
secrets, because I spent more time listening than I did spend my time talking in these conversations. And
Yeah.
so part of that is facilitated by the question. But even at the networking event the other night, it was amazing how at one point this guy had talked nonstop for about 20 minutes, but it was absolutely powerful and profound and fascinating. Just he was a big hedge fund owner of a big, huge hedge fund in Philadelphia, and
Hmm.
fascinating just to hear him talking about tariffs and about the Donald Trump presidency and the impact it's having on the economy and what he thought the tariffs would do and all this. And he just went into this riff, and it was amazing. So we were just sitting there listening. And so one of the things that you think about as a benefit is when's the last time you got to sit with a hedge fund owner and just listen to his insights on the tariffs that Donald Trump is considering?
Yeah.
It came from the simple way I framed the question. Once I understood that he was a hedge fund owner, it
Hmm.
was the way I framed the question that ended up, then he just opened up and started talking and talking. But about 25 minutes in, he stops himself and he says, gosh, I've been doing a lot of talking, but, I've really enjoyed this. Nobody ever asked me for my opinion in the way that you just asked. And I really appreciate that.
Hmm.
Now, think about this. This is a big multi-billion dollar hedge fund operator
Yeah.
who says that he doesn't get asked this question or get this opportunity to share his opinion in what he does every day.
Hmm.
Well, that's part of the magic of the psychology of the question is it gets people to open up and you end up getting to know them faster, more deeply. You don't have to do all the talking. You just listen. You end up learning a ton about different industries and about different things, different people by just asking the question. It also creates a really great gateway into the next conversation. Another thing that's a benefit is what will happen, like if you have a one-on-one and you're with somebody like on an airplane flight or you're in a club or a bar somewhere and you're just sitting with somebody at a networking event, it's just one-on-one,
Hmm.
it might go on for 30 minutes. Well, one of the things that's neat that happens, and this happens probably 80% of the time, the person will pause and go, I've told you things I've told no one else. I don't even know why I told you. And so they end up opening up in a way that's a much deeper, more personal way. But once you hear the question and once you think about it, you'll realize, gosh, nobody has asked me that question. Nobody has asked me that type of question to get me to think about my own current journey. And so
Hmm.
that's why it's such a powerful question.
Wow. Yeah, and what's interesting about that is that, how many times have we thought it's like, man, I'd love to reach out to Warren Buffett or whoever and be like, hey, I'd like to pick your brain. And of course, nobody in those type of positions want to hear the question. Hey, you got 10 minutes to, that I can pick your, nobody wants their brain picked, right?
Right.
And the way that you're framing this question is that, it just breaks down all of those barriers
Yep.
and allows you to soak up the knowledge. And you just mentioned, I think that this is gold, is that they're sharing things that they've not shared before. Sure, you can go and check out books that they've written or maybe biographies that have been written about them and, learn about, their leadership style, how they run their businesses and things like that.
Yep.
But there's nothing like actually hearing it from the source and being able to go deeper with further questions, right?
Exactly, exactly. And then inexplicably, they feel closer to you as well because
Mm-hmm.
they've opened up. They don't realize it at the time, but what they feel and what they experience about being close to you and enjoying the conversation, they don't realize why it's happening that way. But
Yeah.
there's a level of intimacy that gets attached to just simply because you asked the question and then you were able to sit and listen and let them talk and let them express themselves. And so it's a very powerful, very, very powerful experience.
Yeah, and for introverts like me, who would rather be the wallflower,
Yep.
it sounds like that this is a very non-threatening way, to strike up conversations. And like you said, you don't have to worry about, oh, what am I going to say? How am I going to respond? Because they're doing all the talking, and you just open that, that reservoir where they're just like filling up all that time, and you're able to soak up everything that they're sharing with you, and it takes the spotlight off of you and
Yep.
so allows you to really be fully present in the moment. So I know we're getting close to the end of our time here, so I'm sure I'll have some questions, but what is that opening question, and what are maybe some of the follow-up questions that then
Sure.
you ask?
Sure. So basically, if I were contacting you, just as an example, just do it with you, Scott. Hi, Scott. I'm Steven Rowell. I was just curious if
Mhm.
you would have 5 minutes to share with me the secret to your success. Now, that's the short version of the question, but let me
Mhm.
give you in a better example. So, Scott, if you think back to everything you've built with Hit the Inbox book and with what you've done with your inbox business, and even before your business started, if you look back on your career and you look at your personal journey, I was just curious, what do you think is the secret to your success? Now, there's two huge psychological triggers in here. One is
Mhm.
I want you to look back. So I get them to look back. When you look back on your personal career and on your professional journey, before you started your company with the company that you have now, whatever that is. So Fred Smith, you've been with the company 21 years. If you look back on the 21 years that you've been with Federal Express, I'm
Mhm.
just curious if you would look back. And so the first piece of the question is looking back,
Mhm.
to look back. And so then that's number one. Then number two is I'm just curious if you would share the secret to your success.
Mhm.
And then you let the silence rest and then don't speak because you got to let them, because what will happen is this is what you'll get. Their eyes will go back and then they'll go, wow, that's a really good question. Nobody's ever asked me that. This is what you'll get most of the time is what you'll get. Well,
Mhm.
that's a really great question. Nobody's ever asked me that. I was 14 and every summer I used to go to my grandfather's house and for the summer. And I remember when I was 14, he was teaching me how to catch rabbits with a cardboard box, a stick, and a string. And I'll never forget my grandfather taught me XYZ.
Mhm.
In other words, what will happen invariably is the person will share with you a story from some significant moment in their life when they were younger,
Mhm.
from a mentor or a family member or a boss, somebody that taught them something. And this happens, I can't tell you exactly why the psychology of it is, but by asking, I want you to look back on your career, look back on your personal journey. I'm just curious if you look back, what's the secret to your success? Invariably, what you'll get is that's a really great question. Nobody's ever asked me that. Um, I had this uncle of mine who owned a car dealership, and he taught me this whole concept about being an entrepreneur. And so there's always this story back to when they were younger.
Mhm.
And so part of the breaking this down and analyzing this over the years, part of what it is that they go vulnerable early on in the conversation
Mm.
because of
Yeah.
the nature of the question. So I'm just curious, if you look back on your personal career and your professional journey, I'm just curious, what do you think is the secret to your success?
Hmm.
And then they'll go, hmm. And then they go wherever they go, and then they start to open up.
Yeah.
All you do is you listen. And basically, what you can expect is that the next 15 to 20 minutes, you're going to say nothing and you're just going to get to listen and go on this wild ride of learning life lessons, principles, best practices, different things from these people's journeys. And just get ready because it's a fun ride to
Yeah.
basically learn from somebody else. The other thing that I've done with these calls in the past, once I built these relationships and I asked people afterwards, was one of the things that successful people don't ever have is the opportunity just to reflect on themselves.
Hmm.
And by asking the question, you're giving them this massive gift. This is what they've told me. This is what people have told me after doing these conversations. Thank you for the gift of this conversation. Or they'll say, thank you so much for this conversation. This has been so meaningful. Well, why? And so I've researched this with them, with people after I've done the conversations, and I've asked them, what was it about the conversation that was so meaningful?
Hmm.
And what it is we're so busy racing through life and getting things done and achieving things that when somebody asks you to pause and look back and then consider what do you think is the secret to your success, all of a sudden there's this opportunity to think about yourself and to
Hmm.
reflect on yourself and to talk about yourself. And we don't do that in our society well at all. We don't let people, we have it stigmatized as, oh, well, if you're talking about yourself, then you're bragging.
Right.
Right. And so it's all about the context of how you ask the question. And
Hmm.
then people open up and then they're like, wow, that's a really great experience.
Yeah. And, just like you mentioned a while ago, is, you've had several people say, I've never shared that with people before. And
Yep.
just, like you said, when they open up that question, when you say that question, once they open up and they start talking, like you said, they go back to their childhood, which many people probably aren't going to have, those stories in normal daily conversations.
Exactly.
Now, I think one of the things too that you mentioned that's important is that we can't be afraid of the silence,
Mhm.
because once we ask that question, you said, like, it's going to be a little awkward for a few seconds or maybe a minute, because they have to think about how they're going to answer that question. What do you say there? Like, how do you basically advise us to keep our mouth shut when we're feeling that awkward, like, oh, did I ask the wrong thing? Or
Right. Right. So the big thing just to remind yourself is the gold is in the silence and don't screw it up by killing the silence. In other words, just really focus with intention that the silence is there and that's where the gold is in letting them sit and think. Because if you interrupt it, you're going to short circuit where they were headed.
mm-hmm.
Kind of in almost going to the story that's this profound lesson story that they had from their grandfather. And if you interrupt them, they may not go there and they may end up just going to some surface level response. And
Mm-hmm.
you miss the gold of being able to go there with the question.
Sure.
So it is really critically important that you ask the question and then you rest in silence
Mm.
and say nothing and just let them think as long as they need to think. But they'll give you these verbal pauses. They'll say things like, well, that's a really great question. Nobody's ever asked me that question before. Huh, that's interesting. And they'll either look down or they'll look up and you'll see their eyes go back and they're going back into their history, into their mind, and back into their experiences and thinking back to it. And so all of that is just them processing the question. So once
Mm-hmm.
you've got them hooked into the question, you don't want to ruin it by stepping all over the silence.
Gotcha. And you mentioned, they're filling that silence themselves, with those little utterances. And
Yep.
as I look back at conversation where people have asked me questions that I didn't have an immediate answer, I needed to think about it. I find myself saying saying those things, to kind of fill that void.
Right.
Now, like, so is that the same question? So when you called Walmart and asked to speak to Sam Walton and you got the gatekeeper, is that the same question that you asked her? Was like, hey, would Sam have,
Yep.
just curious, would Sam have 5 minutes to
5 minutes.
share with me? And then that's when she went and knocked on his door and said, hey, I've got this guy on the phone wanting to talk to you.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. The gatekeeper, so you ask the question to directly if you get to the gatekeeper. Um, and so what you do is you just say, I'm curious if Sam would have 5 minutes to share the secret to his success. And then the gatekeeper will have whatever response they have, whatever, attitude they take with the question or whether they
Hmm.
think whatever, because they're paid to manage their time.
Yep.
And it's a really great point, though, is that when you ask that question to the gatekeeper, you definitely want to rest in silence and not say a word and let the gatekeeper think about their own response, and then wait for the gatekeeper's response. And typically what will happen is you'll get, well, just give me a minute, and they'll put you on hold, and then it'll feel like forever. Then they'll come back on, and they'll either say, today, one of the more contemporary things is, let me put you on his calendar rather than let me have you talk to him right now. In the 80s and 90s, what was interesting was people would take the call almost immediately.
Right.
Very interesting. In the 80s and 90s, people would take the call almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what you get is there's a second step, which is, well, let me put you on his calendar. Would you be available Thursday for 10 minutes at this time? And I say, yes, I'm available. Now, what's interesting is when you schedule the time, you want to definitely on your end, you want to definitely have 30 minutes to 45 minutes blocked out for that call, because even if they've only scheduled it for 10, trust me, the person's going to go for 30 and 40 minutes.
Yeah.
Because they've never been asked this question, and they've never been given the opportunity to look at their own lives this way and to open up this way. And then when they get interrupted by their gatekeeper, by their executive assistant, they'll say, that's fine, I don't need to be on that call, or have them call me back or whatever. What's amazing is, this is 9 times out of 10. What's amazing is they'll stand and fight to stay on the call rather than get off the call and go to the appointment or go to the meeting or go to whatever it is that's on their agenda. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
It's part of the powerful psychology of the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally different dynamic here. Well, Stephen, I'm sure that we could go a lot deeper, into this. And of course, I'm sure that you've got all of this laid out in your book. So how to connect with anyone, anywhere, at any time. Where can people get a copy of that book? Is that available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble?
Right now, what they can do is they can go to 5minutesecret.com.
Okay.
Go to 5minutesecret.com, and then they can just simply opt in with their name and email, and they'll get the actual blueprint of the actual conversation that we just had.
Okay.
Receive the actual blueprint for the conversation. Yep.
Fantastic. Well, I know that I'm going to check that out. And so, if you're listening to this podcast, if you got here to the end, like, I don't know how you can't be intrigued enough to want to leverage this in your own business. And Stephen, I know you've got some other resources that our listeners can check out as well. Do you want to just share a little bit about those and where they can go grab those?
Sure. There's just some great conversation. There's a discovery conversation. So if you have a new client prospect that you're talking to and you want to have a discovery conversation, similar to this concept of the 5-minute secret conversation, there's a script for those discovery conversations that's available to you. And then also there's an ebook on how to land more corporate clients. And you can simply go to gifts.stevenrowell.com. So it's gifts.steven with a V, Rowell, ROWELL.com, gifts.stevenrowell.com, and you can simply opt in there and get those gifts right from there.
All right. Fantastic. Well, Stephen, I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your insights here today. This has been an insightful conversation. I'm so glad that we got connected here. And we'll make sure that we've got the links to both of the websites where you can go grab a copy of the book, How to Connect with Anyone, Anywhere, at Any Time, as well as the 3 reports. We'll make sure that those are in the show notes for you. So in case you're in a place right now where you can't actually write those down, you'll be able to get those a little bit later. And if you're looking to supercharge your email marketing, check out my book, Hit the Inbox, at hittheinboxbook.com. It's packed with 76 pages of strategies to get your emails landing in inboxes and driving sales. Thanks for tuning in today. If you found value in this episode, and I don't know how you could not have, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on your favorite platform. It helps us reach more entrepreneurs like you. And until next time, keep crushing it in the trenches.